we're seeing a substantial amount of housing insecurity among older adults in Alberta.
It's easy to assume that owning your own home, especially as a senior, is a sign that you're all set, you're financially secure. Well, that's not always the case.
What I'm finding, because it's becoming a liability, it may be worth half a million on paper, but when it comes to having to replace any major appliances or windows, there's nothing out there for them. You better have the money in the bank or oops.
Eric is a volunteer at the tax clinic here at Unison at Kirby Center. He says the issue isn't always major house emergencies, but the steady pressure of everyday costs.
Yeah, in the last probably since 2020, like things have not, monies have not moved in the same way that the cost of things have moved.
A new
So it's
University
there.
of Calgary report is challenging the idea that home ownership guarantees financial security for seniors. The social policy trend study by the university's School of Public Policy is based on a January of 2026 survey of 715 Albertans between 65 and 85 years old. Alex Bierman is one of the report's authors. He said the findings run counter to the common thought that owning a home outright means that a person is financially
Yeah,
secure.
we took a representative survey in January of 2026 of 715 older adults from Alberta. Now, that was age 65 to 85. And what was unusual about our survey is we did not assume that people who own their own homes outright were housing secure. That's a common assumption, both by public policymakers and in the public at large. And so rather than just assuming that people who own their own homes outright were housing secure, we asked them a couple of questions about their level of insecurity. First of all, we asked them if they'd been worried about paying for upkeep to their homes in the previous 3 months. And what we actually found was that just over a third of Albertan older adults who own their own homes actually have been concerned about paying for upkeep in their own homes. And then we also asked people, well, have you considered selling your home due to financial need? That was even more shocking because, quite frankly, about 1 in 6 people in older adults in Alberta who own their own homes had been recently considering selling their own homes due to financial need. We looked at people who were paying a mortgage or renting in a separate category, and quite frankly, there the results were just as concerning. For example, 1 in 5 people who were renting or paying a mortgage had experienced difficulty paying for this rent or mortgage in the last 3 months. And in fact, about 15% had indicated worrying about being evicted or foreclosed upon. So, yes, we are definitely seeing housing insecurity among renters and people who have paying a mortgage as well. But what we're really seeing here is there's also housing insecurity among homeowners. Across the board, we're seeing a substantial amount of housing insecurity among older adults in Alberta.
Do we have previous data to compare this to?
No, like I said, there's just been this assumption that homeowners are housing secure. So this is really one of the first times that we've started to really delve into housing insecurity among people who own their own homes outright.
Has this sense of financial strain gotten worse?
Absolutely, especially over the last decade. I have spent the better part of the last decade tracking financial insecurity among Canadian older adults, and we have definitely seen a rising sense of financial strain among Canadian older adults. They're reporting they're having more trouble paying for household expenses and covering the bills without question. So I think that's simply going to have a domino effect. When people have difficulty paying for their daily necessities, they're also going to have trouble covering rent or mortgage or paying for upkeep on their homes. I do know that research shows that people are reaching later life more in debt. A higher percentage of people are reaching later life more in debt. So that may be a part of it. But I don't know offhand the trends in terms of percentage of people in later life who've paid off their homes.
Well, what's wrong with selling your house? I mean, it's likely worth a lot.
Couple of things about that. First of all, I mean, we're assuming that someone has $1 million home. We don't know whether we don't know if that's the case or not, and we don't know what people would get for that home. Often, when you've been living in a home for decades, that may not be the most choice home, especially with the number of new homes being built in Calgary and Alberta at large. Beyond that, once you sell that home, you still need a place to live. And quite frankly, with housing prices the way it is, it's not necessarily guaranteed that you're going to find a substantially cheaper house in this kind of housing market.
How about renting? Is that a wise option for seniors?
The issue with renting is that you're really subject to increases in rent over the course of the last decade. We've definitely seen substantial increases in rental costs, and so that's very much far from a stable sort of expense that can really increase and eat into the equity that you've turned into cash through selling your home.
What about home upkeep? Is that having an impact on seniors?
Absolutely. What absolutely has happened is a domino effect. When you're having to pay more for your daily life, we've seen increasing prices on food and other sorts of daily needs. When that increases, that has a domino effect. First of all, you have less money aside for household upkeep, and second of all, the costs of household upkeep increase as well. So there's a real domino effect where you may have definitely have a lot of difficulty in keeping up your home. Especially again, we're seeing a lot of new homes being built in Calgary. And so it's becoming it's much more competitive market where do you want a house that's 20 or 30 years old and may have a lot of upkeep needs, or do you want a newer house? And so I think we can't necessarily assume that older adults have this great asset when they've been owning a home for 20 or 30 years.
So, what's the solution to the anxiety that older Albertans are feeling?
Well, something that we have absolutely seen in our own research is that quite simply, the financial supports provided for older adults has simply not kept up with inflation. And I think index supports that are better indexed to inflation are absolutely something that is needed as well.
Do you think this sort of sets the stage for a generational debate then between, say, Generation Z, who feels they can never have the chance to afford a home?
Yeah, it's been very interesting because at the same time that we released this study, a UBC researcher released the reports of a survey saying that many Canadians would support decreasing the ceiling at which older adults can receive OAS without some sort of clawback. And that really concerns me. I think that if we simply keep focusing on which generation has it worse, has it worse, that I think ultimately is a race to the bottom. I think we need to be asking why are people struggling so much, and what can we do about the Canadian economy to help improve both opportunities for younger adults and also make sure that older adults are taken care of.